The Authors Forum exists to inspire success. We will talk with authors and others in the publishing industry to bring you essentials and advice. Dr. Veronica Esagui is your host for Authors Forum.
Welcome to the Authors Forum. I'm your host, Dr. Veronica Esagui, and my guest today is Barbara Grover. She is the author of The Demons of the Wisemen. It's a pleasure to have you here, Barbara.
Thank you, Veronica.
Welcome to the Authors Forum. So, Barbara, would you share a little bit about yourself, where you're from, and just a little bit of
some
a background?
Yeah, sure.
A little background.
I was born in Vancouver, raised in Vancouver. I suspect I will die in Vancouver. But my family is from Ohio. My grandfather and grandmother, their names were Tom and Lena Wisemen, and that's the basis of the book.
What is your very first memory you can recall as a child?
My very first memory is in a crib.
It's in the. You remember being in the crib?
Oh yes, I remember
Wow.
diapers being changed. I remember being in the crib playing with the bottle and dropping it on the floor and that sort of thing. Yeah.
So that would explain why you go so richly writing into your past, and that's awesome.
Could be. Yeah.
Yes, because you have the memories that by what you heard, by your experiences and so on. So tell me, this book, The Demons of the Wisemen, is written on true events of your grandparents, correct?
The true events, yes.
Okay. What inspired you to write that?
I heard my mother talk about her father, who I had only a vague recollection of. My memories of both Tom and Lena, my grandparents, went up to when I was about 3 years old, and that was it. I'd hear my mother talk about her father, and what enabled me to write the book is she mimicked him.
Oh.
And she would talk in his language, she would walk bow-legged like he walked, and she mimicked him. And I had a very, very clear picture of how he talked, how he walked. And then I started collecting all the stories from all of my aunts and uncles. And I started when I was about 20 years old. And pretty soon I was taping their stories because they were so fascinating. And then they started sending me pictures, they sent me letters, and it became a bandwagon effect. And I was able to collect all of those stories and put them together into the book.
So when did you discover your passion for writing? I mean, even prior to the book?
In college.
In college? Okay. What happened?
I took creative writing, and I got very good grades in it, and I found that I loved writing so much that I continued to do it. But interestingly enough, I think that there's this culture out there that says if something is easy for you, it's not worth much. So instead I went into engineering.
What kind?
Mechanical.
Okay. Wow.
And after all is said and done, I wasn't the best engineer that there was.
You were a writer.
I was, yeah. And so as life comes around again, if you really want to find your success in life, it doesn't have to do with money or anything else. You have to find what it is that you're good at, because that's your gift from God, and that's what needs to be developed. And that's what I've discovered.
I tell everyone that's a young person that says, I don't know what I'm going to be, and I always say, what's your hobby? Do your hobby, and then get paid for your hobby. But it depends on the hobby too, you know.
Yeah.
So I think you chose quite correctly to go into engineering, and I'm sure you had to make a living first, right?
Yeah.
So that was good. And now I understand you're doing very well with your book,
Yes.
that it's selling very well. What do you attribute the success you're having with The Demons of the Wisemen?
Everybody who has had the book has read it in 1 to 4 days. Nobody that I've met has taken longer than that to read it, because it's a page turner. And consequently, what's happened is one person tells another, and another tells another. And I've learned about Facebook and some of the other social media, and suddenly it is taken off quite well.
If somebody wants to find you on Facebook, do they just put Barbara Grover?
I don't know how you find people on Facebook.
Okay, well, this will be an interesting research to be done. Just look for Barbara Grover, Facebook.
I guess.
And you get it, right?
Yeah, somehow. Yeah.
Okay.
And the Demons of the Wisemen then is on there, and it's being promoted through Facebook.
Who are the demons of the Wisemen?
That's a good question, because if you think that the book is demonic in some nature, you're not going to want to buy it. But the book is about, instead, personal demons of one particular family, and the effects that the actions of people within the family have on the children, and how it plays out in life. And that becomes their personal demons. And we all have them. Everybody has incidents in their life and in their family that create an atmosphere where we pass on dysfunctional things to our children. And that's what the book is about.
Absolutely right. How long did it take you to write the book? I mean, you started when you were 20 years old, you said.
Doing the research.
The research. There was a lot of research.
A lot.
It's incredible. I mean, you're so accurate about everything, the dates and so on.
Yes.
And the people that your grandparents were involved with. It's just amazing. And there was a time of despair, right? In the sense of what was going on in the country with losing their jobs, and it was the prohibition, right?
It was during, the book spans from prohibition through the stock market crash, into the Depression, and it kind of leads right up. It almost goes, I think, from maybe World War I to World War II. And what I tried to do in writing the book is I wanted the reader to feel like they were actually living that era, so that you understood the history involved, and knew the culture, the history, and most importantly, what women endured during that time period. A time before birth control, a time when women didn't really have the opportunity for employment, what the suffragette movement was about, prohibition itself, and the role of both men and women during that era.
How would you describe the relationship between Daisy and Lena, your grandmother?
You know, that's a great question, because they mirror each other. If you're in a culture and you have no options for employment and you have no options for birth control, you can choose to live your life in relationship to men in two different ways. You can either do it in a very passive way, or you can do it in a very aggressive way. And I see Lena as taking the passive role and Daisy as taking the aggressive role. And each one made their own choices on how they were going to survive in a culture where women didn't have too many choices.
No, throughout the book I kept saying in my mind, like, Lena, get away, run, run, grab the children and run.
Yeah.
And there was no such thing as being able to run for her.
No, there wasn't.
How did you feel about writing about Tom? I mean, how do you feel now? How did you feel when you were writing, and then how do you feel now that you finished writing about him? Has it changed your feelings towards him?
No. Tom, for me, who's my grandfather, but I don't feel connected to him in any way. He is someone to me who, when I wrote the book, I wrote it with some symbolism that most readers wouldn't pick up on. But he represents the law to me, and my grandmother represented love and grace. And with Tom, he was a personality that I felt sorry for. And I think that through Lena's eyes, I think that she also had love for him and felt sorry for him, because he never learned what life was about throughout the whole book. And consequently, he missed life. He just missed it. And there has to be a feeling of sadness for that. Even though Lena suffered, at least she lived her life.
Is that what you think she would tell you if she was to talk to you?
I believe that there is one story that I didn't document in the back of the book. When she was ill, she told her children this. She said, "I trusted God and I loved." And I think that that's what it was about for her, is that in spite of the abuse and in spite of the situation she was in, the way that she survived was to love more instead of loving less.
Where Daisy was totally the opposite. On page 35, it tells us a little bit about Daisy.
Yeah.
Would you mind reading that
Yeah.
about her?
Daisy sighed. "Well, I'm not sure if I can have children." Daisy's words stopped Lena in her tracks. Why would Daisy say such a thing? She was young and so full of life. Daisy shrugged her shoulders and lightheartedly poured cream into her coffee. Mother was a suffragette, away campaigning for a woman's right to vote, while Daddy was home campaigning his way into my bedroom. Daisy discussed it as casually as if it were an item in the paper. Mother went to Washington, D.C. in July of 1913, where a procession of automobiles presented a group of senators a petition of 200,000 signatures gathered from all over the country. It was the single most important time in my mother's life, Daisy paused. It was for the passage of a federal suffrage amendment giving women the right to vote. July 31st, 1913. That was the day. Daisy paused again. That was the day that I became pregnant with my daddy's child. And I was only 13 years old. Well, no wonder 13 is an unlucky number.
Tell me about that. And so that's pretty heavy there, and you're feeling the pain, and that's why I admire you for writing your book with so much truth, because that is the truth of it.
That's right.
Right? And I don't want to give out the plot of what happens, so we'll leave it at that.
Thank you.
Okay. So you did put a lot of documentation at the end of the book, an unusual writing technique, I would say. So what made you decide to add the documentation?
Because I had so much documentation, and because I cannot say that this is a documentary, because it's not. It's historical fiction, and I used artistic license to write the book. So what I chose to do, because I'm using the real names of the people in life, and because I did want to get the entirety of my family story in it, I put all of the documentation that I gathered in the back of the book, not quite all of it, but most of it, and that way the reader can sort through it and decide for themselves. Because it irritates me to go to a movie or to read a book and say it's based on, it's inspired by, and you leave and you really don't know what's truth and what's not, and I really don't like that.
Yeah.
So maybe it's just my own personal thing.
It's not Hollywood written.
Right.
It's written like a real writer should write. You wrote a true
I hope
nonfiction
so.
book.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
The characters have quite a few different accents, and you can feel that through the book, read through the book. How did you learn about them? Can you tell us a little bit more about it?
The accents were probably the most difficult thing for me in writing the book, and yet there is a plethora of accents. You have an Irish accent, you have Southern accents, you have the Appalachian hillbilly accents, and so I think that it gives a lot of flavor to the book, and I think that people will really enjoy reading it when they get that sense of flavor.
Do you read it that way? I mean, can you actually speak that way, or you
I can hear it that way.
You can hear it that way because you wrote it. What you hear. The language used by blacks in today's culture is politically incorrect, and it can be interpreted as demeaning to blacks. So, can you comment on this? Because you took care of that.
Yeah, because you know what? I was kind of doing some research on the internet to talk, because I wanted to, I have a huge heart for what blacks have been through. And I did not want to portray them in a demeaning role, but I did want to be historically correct. And so after doing the research on the internet, the answer I came up with is that there isn't an answer, and that it's something that authors grapple with everywhere. So I chose to present it in a way that is historical, and I think that blacks could be offended if they didn't understand the context of it. But in the book, blacks are not demeaned as people. They are only demeaned as the culture forces them to be in the book.
Just like the Ku Klux Klan, they were
Yes.
trying to get your grandfather to join them.
That's right.
It was either death or joining them at the time.
That's right.
I read that and I was like, oh my gosh, you know? So,
Very accurate.
very accurate. Lena says prohibition has brought the strangest people together. What is your take as the author on this?
That's the part I love about the book the most, because if it hadn't been for prohibition, you would have never seen a woman who came up from despair and poverty into a place where she is at a party with movie makers, with the wealthy industrialist, with other people politicians, baseball players, all of those things came together under prohibition, and the old saying is they make strange bedfellows,
Right.
but that's what prohibition did.
Wow. And who would this book appeal to the most? Who would like to read this book, do you think?
Women probably 20 plus, I would guess, would be the target audience. Men would like it for the history, but the heartbeat, I think, is for women who identify with the struggles of what it's like to be a woman.
I would probably, not to correct, but I would probably recommend it to women, and men should read it too. Just like I feel that men should read more romances so they can be more romantic.
Oh yeah, sure.
You know, and
Yeah.
maybe some of them don't realize, because I am sure there's some of them that are still doing the same things that Tom did in this book.
You know, that's a really good point, because I think if men read this book, I think that they will understand women in a way they have never understood women before.
Exactly.
And that old movie of Mel Gibson says, What Women Want. I think that this book helps to explain a woman's heart.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So they could understand it more and to be able to connect with.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, Tom had no connection whatsoever with his wife by taking other women into his bed
Yes.
and throwing her out of the bed.
And the way in which he did it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how do you envision this story relating to the people today?
Wow. That question I didn't expect, and so I want to just pause and give a moment to it. We've come a long way, baby.
Okay.
As a woman myself, I've worked in engineering in an all-male field. I know how women have been evolved into the workplace. I understand their role in the workplace. I understand the conflict between men and women in the workplace. It has freed up women a lot to work. So I think that a lot has come out of that that's both good and bad. It's given women freedom, but I think it has also caused children to be raised by other people than their parents. So with everything in life, I don't think there's a clear-cut answer to whether or not something is good or whether something is bad. I think that we look at it and we say, well, for women, it's good for the children. Our culture has developed into something to where the kids aren't getting the nurturing they need, and I think that would make an excellent paper for somebody to write.
Yeah, because I noticed that I thought I was kind of smiling when Walt, Lena's son, defended her from being beaten.
Yes.
He was ready, and it was kind of an interesting thing. I don't know if you noticed that, but in the very last picture in the book, where Lena and Tom are standing for the picture with their children, you will notice that Walt has his hand on his father's shoulder like this, like he's not really touching him because he's just there. But on his mother's shoulder, he's got the hand like touching it, like I'm okay, you're going to be okay, you're going to be there. Do you see the expression of the hands on that book, on that picture? That's what I caught on. And so when I read that he defended his mother against his father, I was like, oh, and look how young he was in there. I mean, he looked like he was probably maybe 9, 10 years old. He was already on his mother's side. He was learning not to allow his mother to be...
I think he was about 5 years old there, but I think that the environment aged the children quickly. They became very mature very early in age.
So, do you have any other comments you'd like to add?
Let me see. I think that this book is a book that needs to be read by people who want to understand history and where we've come from. It's one thing for kids today to say, this is the world I live in and this is the culture, without understanding everything that led up to it. To me, this is almost a history book because there are so many historical events in it. And to me, this is a better way of learning history than to just buy a history book and memorize dates, because you get the flavor, the heart of the people, and you get to understand how one thing evolved into another thing that evolves into another thing.
Right. Let me ask you something about the book cover, because I love the book cover. Did you have some say about it?
Yes, I did.
Okay. Is this your car?
That particular car, the artist wanted to know what kind of a cover I was looking for. And and that car matches the prologue of the book.
Yes.
I don't know if you pick up on that or not.
Yes, it's a 1932 Cadillac. Inside the back seat. No, I'm not going to read it.
Yeah.
I read it just absolutely. I love the prologue, by the way. It just gets, you know exactly what's going on. And then you go into the second page where the accents come in with the detectives. And so I just love that. It was just perfect. But so my congratulations to you about the book cover. It's very inviting, and it really speaks for itself. And
a lot happened under the darkness of a lot with Prohibition. There's a lot of activity going on under the darkness of night, a lot of things happening, and you get the feeling from the cover that there's hidden things that you want to find out about and what they mean.
And that is, like you said, it is a page turner because things will go on to happen that you don't even expect it. I like what you've written in the back. It's nice and simple. It is the saga of one family's struggle during Prohibition and the Depression, based on the true events of the Wisemen family, where the demons of the past changed the landscape of the future forever.
Amen.
I like that. Very, very good. So, Barbara, do you have something that you'd like to share with everyone? Maybe possible future writers or something you'd like to, in your legacy to the world?
Wow. Let's see. Don't give up.
Okay.
I've been seriously writing for 8 years, and I promise writers that they will suffer humiliation, defeat, mockery, people that you don't ask their opinion will give you an opinion that you don't want.
Yeah.
Sometimes they're right and sometimes they're wrong. And it is very difficult to make your way through the maze of trying to figure out what opinions you need to pay attention to and which opinions that you need to just toss to the floor and edit out in your life. And I think that you almost have to have a thread of insanity to be an author. And I think only authors would even understand that comment.
Yeah, I understand it completely.
Do you? Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. And I wanted to ask you this. Any future publications?
Books?
Yeah.
The genres are completely different. Somebody that reads this book that would be hoping that I would write another book like it would probably be disappointed, because I am hopping and skipping through the fields of writing things, anything that inspires my heart and my eyes. And I've written a book called One Angel's Opinion that has to do with angels working with men on earth, strictly from a heavenly perspective. Cool. And even though it's something that most people believe that would not inspire them, might be surprised.
Mm-hmm. I can't wait to read that. That's going to be awesome.
The editor called it a masterpiece.
Mm-hmm.
So it is, again, a book that each person has to decide if they like it or not. And I've written many books that I never published that I'm revisiting and possibly preparing to finally release them.
Good. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Because if it is as good as these one, I will be right there on the stand looking for it.
Oh, thank you.
Yes. Barbara, thank you very much for being here today. It has been a pleasure having you as our guest. And until the next Authors Forum, have a most inspiring week.
Thank you.